Hi, my name is Amanda Wong, and I am a director, writer, musician, sound artist, just exploring all the things, living life, and very excited to be here at TAIWANfest. Thank you for having me. So Rosa's Flowers is a short film that is surrealistic, but it's a narrative short film, a little bit experimental, but it's partially set in 1998 Indonesia and partially in Canada in present day. And it's about the friendship of two girls back in 1998, Emily and Rosa, who meet at this very pivotal time of Indonesian history and sort of become best friends, but something happens that separates them, and now Emily, in present day, living in Canada, has to learn how to reconcile this memory of a friend that she once loved dearly, she has to sort of reconcile this memory of a friend that she loves so dearly beyond a fixed point of trauma, and learning how to heal from that, how to remember that memory of her friend again, and how to, trust in the people around her to begin that healing process and, resolve those memories of her past life, living halfway across the world. It also features batik art, installations, projections. We merged a bunch of art forms together in this film, making it a little bit experimental. Got to work with a lot of amazing professionals, experts in their field who, lent their time in support of this film, and very excited to see how it turns out. It's currently in post-production, so maybe we'll look forward to seeing it in 2023. I'm from Southeast Asia. I was born there. I grew up for the first half of my life there before I moved here. So, when I was growing up there, batik is a very beloved and recognizable art form, just all across sort of maritime Southeast Asia, so especially like Indonesia and Malaysia. And I think for me, because of that history of being sort of moved and separated, batik is not only represented as an art form, but also culturally very much representative of memory for me. Like, it's something that I use to access that memory of a time before, when I used to be surrounded by it and now not. So I think in my film Rosa's Flowers, I wanted to use it as sort of this metaphor or motif as representative of memory, of friendship, and I think batik as an art form itself is also very multi-leveled. There are many steps, and it takes a lot of patience and artistry and skill to create your final piece, and very much like filmmaking, I suppose, but kind of wanted to use that as a sort of parallel to friendship, and I think when it comes to memory as well, I liked how a lot of the motifs that I had grown up with were flower motifs, and to me they reminded me a little bit of brain synapses, and this is kind of where it stemmed from, where I was hoping to use that to sort of represent memory and thinking about the past, but also reconnecting with the present, and how we continue to explore these art forms today, and also how memory can be part of the present. As someone who only has a very sort of layman understanding of batik art, we had to do a lot of research, and I spoke to a lot of amazing women who were curators or experts in batik and textiles, people from museums, or people who were specifically curators of Indonesian textiles. And they all very much sort of highlighted this not only the process of how batik is made, but how important the artisans who make it are. Nowadays it's so ubiquitous to see batik patterns that are just sort of mass printed in like the way that you would just print regular clothing because it's cheaper and more affordable. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that there's also a very important part of history in preserving the way that these women are making it, both either by hand using a wax chanting or, with the stamp. Like those are very sort of time-staking art forms that are very specialized and have developed over the course of time, and each area also has a very different form of type of art that they've passed down on through their generations. So shout out to our batik designer and on Rosa's Flowers, Shazlin Rahman. She told me, her art is also inspired by her grandmother's sarongs, and that's why her Instagram and her sort of artwork title is Her Sarong, because that sort of also speaks to that maternal that passing down of things that are important to us, and that includes batik, and that includes all forms of artwork. So I never was involved in the art of actual making it myself, but I've definitely been surrounded by batik textiles and clothing and stuff growing up. So my grandmother on my mother's side is Indonesian, and so I really grew up with that kind of influence. And her mother, my great-grandmother, when I was growing up, she, till the day that she passed away, every day wore these beautiful batik sarongs and with a kabaya, very traditional outfit till like she was all the way in her late 90s, never wore anything else. So kind of being very much around that, the material, the motifs, being sort of familiar with that, but not in sort of any sort of expert way, just sort of in a layman's way. But I think, that was very much passed from my great-grandmother to my grandmother to my mother, and then to me in terms of our exposure and love for these types of patterns and motifs. And one of the things that is very often, I think, passed down, I can't speak for everyone, but at least in my family, sarongs and other of these types of textiles, materials, and clothing were passed down from my great-grandmother to my grandmother and to my mother, and maybe one day to me. So we'll see how that pans out. But I think very much just sort of the generational culture, heritage, and growing up with that is definitely was very important in my side of the family, and I had incredibly amazing maternal role models, very strong maternal role models who inspired and influenced me when I grew up. So part of their influence is also sort of that legacy of culture that they grew up with and maybe had to leave behind. There's a lot of sort of stories from that side of the family of what happened during World War II or at specific points of crises, and how they're able to keep those important things and those parts of themselves then until today and pass those down to the newer generations. But I think speaking outside of my personal experience, batik artisans are very often, if you go to a workshop or you watch a video online about it, especially in the maritime Southeast Asia, have primarily been women, and this has been an art form that has been passed down through women. So I'm the type of filmmaker that's I really like watching films that are a little bit open-ended and allow people to kind of come to their own conclusions about what happened in the film and how they're feeling and how that sort of relates to their own experience in their own life, because we're all very different people with different perspectives. And so with most of my films, I try to have that same approach, including with Rosa's Flowers, where what I want people to take away most is the feelings of the film, like being able to feel and relate to the characters, what they're going through, and maybe that leads to a feeling within themselves as well as an audience member, and how they interpret it in the context of their own life. The separate side of it is also encourage dialogue about other cultures or other events that happened. So Rosa's Flowers takes place in 1998 in Indonesia, which not many people know that there was a sort of two very large riots that happened in that year in 1998 that affected sort of the whole nation and a lot of the diaspora that is now living outside of Indonesia, who perhaps left during that time. And beyond what we learn from our history books and stuff, and speaking with people about what happened back then, and what that looks like 30 years later in revisiting events. And then the third thing is that the film deals a lot with themes of trauma and what that looks like specifically from a diasporic sort of perspective, when you have been separated from a fixed point of trauma. And we worked with this amazing mental health consultant. Her name is Sarah Khatri, and something that we spoke about is how trauma doesn't, like whether it's from the diaspora or not, trauma is not something that is solvable in the movies. Like it's a quick fix, like now happy ending, it's, people might live with trauma forever. But what does healing look like for you or for an individual? And that means different things for different people. I think right now, the time that we're in right now feels different to me than maybe even just 5 years ago. I think at this moment of 2022, I feel like we're riding on a wave of momentum, of forward momentum. I feel like there have been more opportunities opening up for folks who are historically, may not have had opportunities open to them. The Black, Indigenous, and people of color who work in the industry, I think have always, it's a very sort of film is a very sort of white male dominated industry, and so it's historically been a little bit difficult for people of color to break in, and even when you do, it's sort of like you have to be a certain type of person of color. I know it sounds like weird to say, but and also just in general audience, I think there's this idea that Asian artists have to make art only for Asian viewers, and I think that there needs to be more of a universality to that, where everyone can enjoy all forms of content, and that's how we learn about things and how we learn and enjoy new things about each other. I have spoken with some Asian Canadian filmmakers who their families have been here for like 3-4 generations, and they've grown up with generations of being Canadians, of living here in Canada, but they're still relegated to this idea that they should be producing immigrant stories, or they're still sort of seen as the other, as they're always going to be Asian first before they're Canadian. So I think that's also important to address, if that of how we're exploring Asian stories and the representation, that we're exploring it over a range of different experiences and not just one. I think right now, at my point of my career, a lot of the exploration into arts is very personal and very internal, and I think that's seems to be like a common trend in terms of accessing visual or sonic language, and how to use that is you write best or you speak best from when you're able to speak of something from your own perspective. And so I think very much a lot of my films and work, music writings have been very much exploring, topics of loss, nostalgia, memory, community, because these are all things that are extremely personal to me and have helped me grow in my journey as an artist. And so these are the types of stories that, I feel important for me to tell. As a filmmaker, we tell stories that there's always going to be a part of ourselves in every story, and I think as a documentary filmmaker, I've definitely felt that. But, my story is not always the most important, and I want to be able to highlight stories beyond my experience as well, while still having my perspective within that storytelling. And so I think that film allows us to tell stories in ways that can invite people to think about worlds and emotions and characters maybe beyond themselves or beyond their realm of or their paradigm, but it allows us to access this information in a way that's still relatable to us, and that's what I would love to try and cultivate as a filmmaker. The films that I loved when I was growing up and the films that I love exploring were films that they opened my mind to a concept or a culture or an understanding of something new that I didn't understand before, in a way that allowed me to relate to that maybe I wouldn't have seen outside of the box, that I was in from before. And so with films, I think that that's such a powerful medium to be able to do that. And I would love to, continue that kind of storytelling, to invite people to engage in dialogue and discussions and concepts beyond their own world, but in a way that, that we're able to access, that's friendly, that's relatable to an everyday audience. But music is special in another way. And as a musician and as a sound artist, I think that that feeling, like in Ratatouille, where when you taste something and it brings you back to like a moment in time, or like it makes you feel a certain way, and it's so inexplicable, right? Like there's no real way to explain how you feel when you feel it. And I think music is one of those things, even more so than film, that when you hear something or you hear a melody or a certain chord, it makes you feel a certain way. And how does that work? That's the most interesting part about music storytelling to me, is how do we use sounds, notes, pitches, melodies to blend together to create a feeling that allows us to tell a story. Whether or not a song even has lyrics, I think that it is still able to tell a story through feelings and through emotions, and it allows people to conjure their own storytelling to blend that into what they're hearing, and so that's so relatable and so magical to me, and very, very healing to me, and I think that music is just so universal too, especially if it doesn't have lyrics. Like, it can mean so many different things to different people, and when you listen to a song, you look up the lyrics, even like different people will have different interpretations of what songs mean, and I love that. I love that that sort of ability to be able to transcend just one meaning, that we can, as a community, sort of determine like when things are important to us, and we don't necessarily need to know why they're important, or we don't necessarily need to know the exact plot or outline of a story. We just know that it speaks to us, and that's what's really beautiful about music. And so I hope that, in the future, in the stories that I tell with film and music, that I can continue to sort of remind myself of these aspects, and continue to challenge, I guess, traditional models of what we think is art or what we think is music or film, and still be able to have it be relatable to an audience in a way that they can access it in their own lives and experience that in themselves. I think I used to have this idea of independence from a sort of North American perspective, in the way that when you watch Hollywood films, it's like you can do whatever you want and like freedom and stuff. But then as I was growing older, I was like, this is not really the case of what independence means for everybody, especially if, you have very strong ties to your family or your community, for example. I think that maybe we have this idea sometimes of independence as being like alone, or like being able to survive and be very strong on your own. And I think resilience is absolutely a part of independence, but I think that independence is also important in the context of community, that you can still be independent while maintaining ties to community. In fact, I think that independence needs community, because maybe for me, I think I'll just speak personally about what independence meant or is or means to me, and obviously I'm still exploring this, but I think the moments where I feel seen and heard, or where I have the ability to see and hear others for who they are the moments that I feel independent, that I feel that that people are able to see me for who I am beyond what I look like or who I'm with, or being able to make these decisions to see what the people and the things and the content that I want to see. And I think that is the heart of independence for me, is being seen and also being able to make the decision to see others. So again, I'm Amanda Wong. I'm a filmmaker, and thank you so much for watching this video. Really appreciate you watching and spending some time with me and chatting about Rosa's flowers and film. If you're ever curious about my other work, you can check out my website at amandaamwong.com, or my Instagram handle is at amandaamwong. Feel free to send me a DM. I love chatting with all of you, so anytime. Hope that we can chat soon if you do reach out, and I'm very excited to share the film with you. Thanks TAIWANfest for having me.
TAIWANfest explores the stories of independence. Indulge in Indonesia. Discover Malaysia. Toronto, TAIWANfest.ca.